Hi everyone, I'm Teresa Glayback, and for my SMCS posting, I will be discussing telework. I'll walk through the difference between telework and telecommuting. Then I will discuss the benefits for both the employer as well as the employee of being able to work from home. Then I'll discuss some of the general telework policy aspects of policies that firms tend to introduce when discussing telework. Then I will discuss what a medium-sized company in Vermont would implement typically for a telework policy and how they would go about that. First, telework versus telecommuting. Telework means that someone is working full-time from home. Telecommuting, on the other hand, allows the employee to work part-time from home and part-time from the office. Between these two aspects of remote work, about 2.6% of the workforce is involved in this type of remote option. And that 2.6% has been increasingly on the rise as more and more firms are seeing the benefit of having people work from home instead of paying for that office space for them. Some of the benefits for the employer is that it allows them to broaden their search pools for better employees. For example, a firm in Vermont might have a hard time finding a lot of talent, but by offering a remote option, they're able to reach potential employees that are located in larger cities or in different areas where people with more expertise tend to move to find work. It also allows for the employer to have a smaller office space if they are teleworking instead of telecommuting. Now, telecommuting, they would still need a pretty large office space because that employee will come into work every now and then. But by offering a telework option, then they can reduce their office space or increase their in-office staff if necessary. By having an employee that's working from home, it also leads to less electricity consumption because you no longer have that person's computer, um, lights in their office, etc. It will also allow for less of a carbon footprint because the person is no longer driving into work each day as well. On the employee side of it, they've found that they're more productive during that amount of time because they're working from home. They can get their own stuff done. They can work more hours because they're already home, so they don't have to factor in that commute time to get home in time for dinner with their family, or they don't have to leave as early in the morning to get in for their start time. It also offers a lot more flexibility. For example, if someone wants to take a little bit of an extra break, they might work more in the afternoon, etc. Now, for telework policies, because the individual's not in the office, there's a lot of key aspects that they need to look at. One of the first is establishing the eligibility requirements. There will never be a firm that can be 100% remote. There is always going to be someone who needs to be in an office doing some sort of work for the firm. However, highly specialized jobs where they don't need a lot of internal support or face-to-face interactions with the client as often are eligible for telework, especially if they aren't working or in a team or a team environment is not necessary for their work. So by establishing those eligibility requirements, they're able to determine which roles they can move out of the office. It's also important that next they define the employee and manager roles. Because the employee is working from home, that changes the lines of communication for them. And the roles get a little blurred because the employees at home, they're working off what they know, and sometimes you can't just pop in and ask your manager what you're supposed to be doing. So defining those clear roles and when they can interact with each other, what the expectations are between evaluations and things like that are important to define early on. The other key thing to look at is that training for telework is very different because you're working from an office at your own home instead of going into the office. So a lot of issues around technology or things like that are going to have to be addressed by the worker themselves instead of by someone on staff that's prepared to handle that situation. Now, going back to the communications policy and topic that I was just discussing, it's making those clear lines of how do you want to be communicated with, when do you want communication, and what needs to be communicated, what should be communicated, and what stuff should the employee handle on their own. The important thing also to define is emergency situations and what actions should be taken. A lot of times, homes don't have as much backup for if the power goes out or the internet goes down, etc. Whereas in your office, they have a team that's working on it and they've already reached out to the power company, they have backup generators. So it's important to define how you're going to communicate that you can't work that day even though you're working from home. Excuse me. It's also important to define policies about home safety and technology because it is private information that's being brought into the home, and that can be a privacy concern for companies, especially with sensitive information. Now, looking at a Vermont company, they're going to want to first convert remote workers for highly specialized jobs that don't require that on-site support, as I mentioned previously, because those highly specialized jobs are the ones that are often found in high population cities, as opposed to rural Vermont. Another thing that needs to be determined first and foremost for a Vermont company is, will the role need to be done during normal business hours? Typically, with highly specialized jobs, those don't necessarily have to be done within those normal business hours, but anything that's client facing in any way would need to be done during those hours. The next thing a Vermont company will do is set clear communication expectations, as I've mentioned previously. And they'll also want to determine the frequency of office visits. A lot of times, smaller, medium-sized companies want that face-to-face interaction, and it's important to determine how often and when those visits are going to occur. They also need to set clear expectations on hours, performance, productivity, etc., so that their employees are set up to be as successful as possible. Thank you so much for your time. I hope that enlightened you a little bit on the telework atmosphere in the United States. Thank you.